Right. Today we are starting with continuing with the fifth chapter, that was the testability and monitoring. We were at the topic 5.5, baselining approved requirements. So, so far we have talked about the necessity of the traceability, what is traceability, how it is done, and now we are at the stage where we are baselining the approved requirements. So, what is requirements baselining? The requirements baseline is the boundary that contains all of the approved requirements for the project phase, iteration, increment, release, or any other part of a project. So whatever requirements have been finalized and agreed, they are to be baselined. So all approved requirements with the stakeholder, agreed with the stakeholder, are called the baseline. The baseline provides a mechanism for comparison, thereby allowing the project team to recognize that a change has occurred. So if at a later stage there is a matter of comparing what you are making with the requirements, then you can always trace it back to the baseline. And not only that, but even if there are some changes to the requirement, they have to be entered into the baseline through proper approval process. All approved work is inside the boundary of baseline. Everything outside of the boundary needs to be approved. So anything which has not been approved so far is not baseline. Once requirements are approved, these can be changed only through the change control procedure defined for the project. The degree of formality applied to changes outside the baseline varies depending on the project lifecycle and the organization's processes for managing change. So whatever is the change management procedure in your organization are described for the project, that would apply, but none of the requirements will be accommodated without proper change request into the baseline. Project using a predictive lifecycle is apt to apply a more formal and complex change control process. A less formal process is used for project with adaptive lifecycle, because adaptive revolves around the change itself, because this is you are releasing the product in iterations, and iterations have a tendency to change. Maintaining the product backlog for more information regarding change in an adaptive lifecycle. Actually, the product backlog, which I had described to you earlier, that is where the change happens. The requirements are being put into the product backlog, and we are only working on a small portion of the requirements, while remaining requirements are lying in the product backlog, which can be changed anytime by the stakeholder. Relationship of requirement baseline, product scope, and the project scope. As we all understand already, project scope is the work to be performed to deliver a product, service, or result. Product scope is all the functions and features comprised into the product or the service we are trying to produce. And requirements describe those features and functions of the final product, service, or result for the project. Therefore, there is a direct relationship between the numbers of requirements and the product scope. So all the requirements are encapsulated into the product scope, describing what is to be created, and project scope defines how it is to be created. The more approved requirements there are, the larger the product scope and the project scope. Maintaining product backlog. Business analysis work is important on projects, but regardless of whether the project follows adaptive or predictive lifecycle, no matter what, but requirements are always there, both cases. For projects that follow an adaptive lifecycle, that is like agile, baselining requirements is performed by maintaining the product backlog. Product backlog is my baseline. So if anything is to be changed in the product backlog, that is allowed, but naturally through a proper procedure. The product backlog is the list of requirements usually written in the form of user stories. Although not commonly referred to as a baseline. We don't call really a baseline there. The principle is the same for all project life cycles. Backlog may have some large user stories, which, when broken down, may include options that are not going to be selected and are not approved. On adaptive lifecycle projects, a subset of backlog is approved for each iteration. The product owner is accountable for the product requirements known as features, as well as for making priority decisions based on which requirements or user stories provide the greatest business value. So with this, we have been talking about we have to deliver the business value, we have to deliver the product and all that. So whatever we are fulfilling the requirements, ultimately those requirements, the genuine requirements, are those which will actually deliver the greatest business value. Requested requirements, which are the features in this case, are written up as user stories and added to the product backlog throughout the project. So this is a continuous process. While the project is going on, the new requirements might be, we may keep adding them into the product backlog all the time. We can keep changing the user stories which are already there. But naturally, as I said, there must be a procedure to do that. It should not be a free format. Although this is not as stringent as in the waterfall model or the traditional model, but in agile and in adaptive method, we are allowed to make changes, but naturally through a proper procedure. New requirements often surface after a product review at the end of each iteration, but could be requested at any time. The priority of user stories can change at any time. A requirement thought to be a high priority at the beginning of a project may be changed to a lower priority as the project progresses. On the other hand, the product owner could elevate the priority of other requirements that were originally thought to be unimportant. The business analyst and person performing that role may choose to maintain the status of requirements as the project release iteration is executed. As requirements are added to the product backlog, our changes in priority result in the movement of requirements from one release or iteration to another. The changes are tracked and communicated to the appropriate stakeholders as agreed upon in the communication plan, either formally or informally. Next is monitoring requirements using a traceability matrix. First, please confirm if you are okay with 5.5, which we have just covered. Yes, Bushra?
One question that,
Yes,
sir,
please.
I have one question related to product backlog. When we are saying that we can create stories, and if there is there can be multiple stories, and we can epic. I think it was epic or some epic, right?
Epic. Yes.
Epic, right? So when we found that we can create the multiple stories of that epic,
Yes.
but there's a possibility that we have created two stories, and during our working we found that it should be we should break it into more stories, and we have selected two or three of them among those stories, and the new created we shifted to the backlog items, right? Then it means that that particular requirement is not completed until the other two stories are delivered and developed. The
Okay.
requirement will not be completed, right?
The first thing is Epic is a larger requirement which could be broken down into user stories. Each user story represent a feature, one feature.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
naturally, the sequence of making, realizing those features could be, one after the other. But every feature is a success in itself. So
Okay.
you may have them in sequence, but a feature once it's completed, the feature is delivered. So all
Mhm.
the features, first of all, we had the epics in the product backlog. We have broken down them down into user stories, and then we have sorted them, prioritized them, and we have refined them. And after that, we have moved on, and we started working. maybe at the end of the first iteration, we learned some new requirements as a result of what we have did just now. The iteration we just completed, reviewing the results of that, we learned that, oh, yes, we need to have another requirement to be, another function to be added in light of the previous iteration. So we can add it as a new requirement, as a new user story into the product backlog. We can even
Okay.
break an existing user story, which we feel that previously we thought it is one feature, but it can be broken down into 2 or 3 features. So we can even break it down later on. So in Agile, these things can keep happening all the time throughout the life of the project. But again, there should be some procedure. We should not leave it independent. Anybody is coming and changing anything, that is not allowed. But naturally, this has to be proper record have to be kept.
Okay, sir.
Next is 5.6, monitoring requirements using a traceability matrix. Traceability matrix we have discussed already. Let us see how we use it to monitor requirements. Once the requirement attributes are determined, the traceability matrix is created and requirements approved and baselined. The requirements are monitored throughout the project lifecycle. So all of this has been done already. We have the requirement attributes determined. We have the traceability matrix created. We have the requirements approved and baselined. And now we are in the process of monitoring the requirements, and that is going to go on for the life of the project. So at this point, every detailed requirement should align with the business requirement. As we said earlier, all what we are doing must be aligned with the organizational objective and business requirement, must deliver the business value. Business requirements are discussed earlier in the very second chapter, second section, that is the needs assessment. Projects with an adaptive lifecycle that use a traceability matrix may build the matrix incrementally in a consistent manner as details are elicited and analyzed. Benefits of using traceability to monitor requirements. Monitoring requirements throughout the lifecycle using a traceability matrix or similar structure helps to ensure that more detailed requirements that surface are linked to the baseline requirements. A complete set of baseline requirements has the detail needed to build a feature or set of features. So all the features are explained as user stories. Supporting business analysis work products are created for each baseline requirement when needed. Work products created across phases, such as design and test documents, are created for each approved requirement, and scope creep can be prevented, which in traditional project management probably we can't you know prevent scope creep until and unless we are extremely very careful. But here, because the requirements are changing and we are accommodating them in the product backlog, therefore there is possibility of scope creep is almost next to none. More detailed requirements that surface are linked to the baseline requirements. As the requirements are progressively elaborated and additional details surface, the relationships are progressively elaborated. Every detail relates back to the higher level of the requirement. For example, an organization has a baseline requirement to support multiple customer types. Through business analysis requirements workshop, it is uncovered that there is a difference in how complaints are handled for each customer type. Detailed requirements emerge for a conceit service for business customers, which trace back to the initial requirement. So this is how we are tracing the requirement back to the initial requirement. Second is a complete set of baseline requirements has the detail needed to build the feature or set of features. So the baseline requirement is has encapsulated all the required features. When a high level requirement exists with no associated feature requirement, can you hear me?
सर आपकी आवाज कट के आ रही है.
Okay. I'll start it again. अभी ठीक है आवाज?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay. So I was saying, a complete set of baseline requirements has the detail needed to build the feature or set of features. So whatever the feature are, the complete set of features you want to be included in a requirement, those requirements have already been baselined, is a complete set of all the requirements which is encapsulated into it. When a high level requirement exists with no associated detailed requirement, this point this point to an area needing further requirement elicitation to uncover the details. That means that this requirement needs to be further divided into features and user stories because it is not descriptive by itself. Third is supporting business analysis work products are created for each baseline requirements when needed. An organization decides to create a conceit service to business customers, process flows are developed to demonstrate the various interactions between the business customer and the conceit service. Training documents are developed to help staff address customer types and the associated processes. 4. Work products created across phases, such as design and test documents, are created for each approved requirement. When there is a requirement with no associated work product, there is a risk that important components may be missed. For example, in a software development project, approved requirements need to be designed, built, tested, implemented, and verified so that the appropriate work product, such as the physical database design and other design document programs and test cases, can be developed. So there has to be a link. Everything which is being developed must be usable, must be actually the part of the requirement. Work products created across phases, such as design and test documents, are created for each approved requirement. Requirement relationships are monitored to the related work products to help ensure that gaps between the approved requirement and what has been built and tested are not missed. When gaps are identified, the business analyst should cancel or defer the approved requirements or create the missing work product. So either the requirement is to be removed or the work product is to be created which is not existing. Scope creep is prevented. PMI defines scope creep as the uncontrolled expansion to product or project scope without adjustments of time, cost, and resources. So that means this is a change without change request. This is something which you have somehow approved, but it did not go through the proper change request process. Projects using a predictive lifecycle with many work products can monitor requirements relationships and also review each work product that is created throughout the project to ensure that it links back to an approved requirement. For example, when requirements are included on a traceability matrix, it is easier to see this linkage and spot missing requirements. By routinely comparing work products to requirements on traceability matrix as they are created, gaps can be questioned and appropriate action taken. For example, a developer working on a user interface for an order entry screen decides to exceed customer expectations by highlighting the data fields that the customer changes to yellow to make them stand out. These changes are programmed without obtaining approval and are not discovered until user acceptance testing. The sponsor is not happy with the change, which ultimately results in rework costs and schedule overruns. Had test cases been created at the point of design or development, these changes could have been checked against the approved requirements and brought to the sponsor for approval. In this case, the request would have been declined before because the sponsor knew the highlighted text is problematic for clients who use mobile devices to place orders. Another example, product owners on projects using an adaptive lifecycle manage scope creep through regular reprioritization of the backlog. Actually, we do it that way. In our adaptive lifecycle, we keep reprioritizing our backlog, and that way, scope creep is automatically managed. For adaptive projects, traceability matrices may be used to help manage scope creep, or less formal techniques may be used to achieve the same level of thought. Next is the requirement life cycle. The status or state of requirements is a common attribute on the traceability matrix. The state of a requirement characterizes where it is in the requirement life cycle. The requirement life cycle, not to be confused with the project life cycle, represents the various phases that a requirement moves through as it is maintained across the project. So, the phases of the requirement are different from the phases of the project. During business analysis planning, the list of requirement states is defined for the project. When an organization uses the requirements management tool, the requirement state is maintained automatically by the software after the business rules for determining state changes are configured within the tool. Without a requirements management tool, the business analyst maintains the status manually. An authorizing body influences the requirement state when making decisions on requirements, such as approving a requirement but postponing it to another project iteration or project phase, deferring a requirement to some unspecified future project iteration or project phase, replacing an approved requirement that has not been started with another requirement, canceling an approved requirement, rejecting rejecting a requested requirement, or a combination of the above. For example, the authorizing body could approve one part of the requirement but defer another part. That is, that requirement probably has to be broken down into user stories. One part is approved, one is not. Figure 5.2 is a state diagram coming next that provides an example of some common requirement states and the life cycle that may be followed. The actual states that a project tracks can vary considerably between and sometimes within organizations. For each project within organizational constraints, a decision is made concerning which states the organization is willing and able to track and manage. The requirement state is used when reporting requirement status to the project stakeholders. For example, the state is required to order in order to report how many requirements are documented and how many are approved, deferred, rejected, in order to provide a fuller understanding of the conditions of the requirements on the project at any given point in the life cycle. Managing changes to requirements 5.8. A change to a requirement may be proposed at any time during a project. This is completely open. Requirements can change any time during the life of the project. Who can propose these changes and how these changes are proposed are defined in the business analysis plan. Although suggested changes may be initiated verbally, these should be recorded for tracking and management purposes. So here is the diagram example of the requirement life cycle. You see, example of a requirement life cycle shows there are certain open requirements and there are certain closed requirements. So the open requirements are, they are proposed, they are being approved, they are in progress, and then they are completed. But during this process, when they are being proposed, they could have been rejected. And while they are in progress, maybe, or they are approved and in process, at that stage, we could have cancelled them or deferred them. And when a requirement is complete, it is implemented. So this is the life cycle of the requirement. Change requests are a part of the overall change control process. PMBOK guide defines a change request as a formal proposal to modify any document, deliverable, or baseline. When the change request template is defined and maintained as an organizational process asset, the project team is required to use the approved template on the project. In cases where a template is not defined, the template needs to be created as part of business analysis plan. Some project life cycles use an informal change control process and therefore a less formal proposal is acceptable. For example, discussing the change. So while discussing, you come to a conclusion, you all agree verbally. So this is also one kind of change control, but you see, it could be more formal, it could be written down and documented. Change control process defines how changes are submitted. The formal change control change requests are submitted manually or as part of an online process. The business analyst monitors change requests and takes an active role in assessing the impacts of a proposed change. A change request process defines the information required to be gathered before a request can be considered for approval. The business analyst may be required to collect information based on the level of effort to make the change, cost impacts, risk impacts, and impacts on completed work are existing approved requirements. Eventually, every log change request should be approved, deferred, or rejected by the change approving body in accordance with the process defined in the business analysis plan. The change process may require a recommended turnaround time that the project team needs to adhere to when assessing a proposed change. So, what all is included in that? Change management. Number one, change management as it relates to the business analysis. So, there was one change management which is related to the business analysis, and the other change control was about the project. So, we are talking about the business analysis first. Within change management, the role of the business analyst is to maintain the integrity of the requirements and the associated deliverables and work products, and to ensure that each new requirement aligns with the business need and business and project objectives. The key benefit of a requirements change process is to allow for changes to documented requirements while reducing product and project risk, which often arises from making changes without consideration to the overall impact of the product and project, as well as considerations related to dependencies. The applied level of change management is dependent upon many factors, such as application area, the organizational culture, the organizational process assets, complexity of the specific project and end results, contractual requirements and project lifecycle, and the context and environment in which the project is performed. So these all factors are going to impact on your change management. Project managers and business analysts both have an interest in change management. The project manager is concerned with all changes associated to the project scope, and as we already understand, the product uh, scope is actually the subject of business analyst. Approved change requests may require adjustments to the project management plan and other project documents, cost estimates, activity sequences, schedule dates, resource requirements, and the analysis of risk response alternatives related to the project. Therefore, the project manager is very much involved in change management activities. The business analyst is interested in understanding the impacts to the product scope, such as how the change request will impact the documented requirements, existing and approved business analysis work products, that is, the process flows and models, and any product components that have been built and tested from existing approved requirements. So the collaboration point here is assessing the impacts a proposed change will have on project and product scope requires the collaborative effort of both the project manager and the business analyst. It is important for the business analyst and project manager to have frequent communication about the proposed changes and their disposition. For projects using an adaptive life cycle, the team determines the details for most of the requirements on a just-in-time basis. Most details are listed during the iteration or increment in which the requirements or user story will be delivered. Because requirements details emerge along the way, product owners and their teams expect changes during the adaptive project. Product owner regularly reprioritizes what is to be delivered, usually at the start of a new iteration. Since adaptive projects rapidly deliver small increments, while changes tend to be frequent and each change is often small, it is more likely that small changes will be assessed on an informal basis. Changes that add value can be accepted and prioritized. The approaches to change management taken by projects using adaptive life cycles are evolving. Variations for change management on adaptive projects include but are not limited to discussing changes and adjusting the backlog, or even the Kanban board based on the discussion. Managing change simultaneously from a long range, mid range, and immediate range perspective are using automated tool support to streamline a more formal change management approach. Manual the change control tools and techniques, manual or automated tools may be used to manage change requests and the resulting decisions. These tools may already be in place within the organization. When a change control tool is being introduced on a project, the needs of all stakeholders involved in the change control process should be considered. The collaboration point here is the business analyst and the project manager needs to work together to ensure that both business and technical stakeholders' needs are met when defining the change control process and the supporting tools. So the first thing within this heading is configuration management system. I hope you understand what a configuration management plan or a configuration management system is. This is keeping record of all the changes. So this is the mechanism of keeping the record of various versions of the product or requirement. Configuration management helps to ensure the product or service being built conforms to its approved requirements. It provides a process to verify this conformance, document changes, and report the status of each change throughout the project lifecycle. So from anywhere you can trace back and look at the configuration management system and find where the requirement has changed. It includes documentation, a tracking process, and defined approach levels necessary for authorizing changes. It enables managing changes to aspects of a product in the context of the entire product as well as the context of other products on which it depends or which depends upon it. Configuration management for business analysis ensures that the requirements and requirement-related documents, such as models, traceability metrics, and issues lists, are stored where they can be easily accessed by the project stakeholders and are safeguarded from loss. You see, we are ensuring transparency. We are not hiding any information from anyone. These things must be available for access to the project stakeholder, all of them. Then access to previous versions of documents is available when needed, because anytime you need to compare your earlier requirements, earlier version of the requirement with the current version of the requirement. Business and analysts may achieve these objectives with a configuration management system, a requirement management repository, or with a wiki platform. When using less formal tooling, such as a wiki, the CM goals will not be achieved. That is, the configuration management goals will not be achieved without a process on how and when to access and write to the wiki. The process for storing requirements related information and the tools to support the project needs and are determined and agreed upon in business analysis planning. The second part of it is the version control system itself. One is the configuration management system, which was describing how the versioning will be done or how the records of all changes will be kept. And now we are allocating a version numbering system. This is called the version control system. A version control system tracks the history of revisions, but not always those that are related to software. A VCS is like a baseline in that the original code or work product is established and changes to that code or work product are tracked. A VCS falls under the umbrella of the configuration management system and is one of the many processes that comprise configuration management. Although often associated with software source code, a VCS can be used for managing business analysis documentation. When the requirement documentation is extensive, a VCS may be appropriate. A version control system tracks the history of revisions, but not always those that are related to software. A VCS is like a baseline in that the original code or work product is established and changes to that code or work product are tracked. A VCS falls under the umbrella of a CMS and is one of the many processes that comprise configuration management. Although often associated with a software source code, a VCS can be used for managing business analysis documentation. When the requirements documentation is extensive, a VCS may be appropriate. Project teams need to decide whether or not previous versions of requirements and models are required. If this is a necessity for the project team, a VCS can help support this requirement. Version control ranges from a simple system for example, using a document file name to reflect a date, time, and version number, to a more formal approach where documents are maintained by a tool that requires the documents be checked out of a library locked by the system during the editing process, checked back in with mandatory comments explaining the changes made and versioned automatically by the tool. So it may not be automated tool, it may be a manual tool, but it is all in today's world. This is becoming fast, being adopted, that version control is automatic by nature. When version control is required for the requirements documentation and when a version control system will be used should be noted in the business analysis plan. Then is the impact analysis. Before I can start the impact analysis, if you have any comment, please.
No, sir, I understand it, but actually we keep the versioning as well. For every document, actually we keep the versioning so that what is the requirement and then what we have updated, what is the change occurred. We are not following the agile method, but we do keep this versioning, to keep a
Okay,
track of the documents.
okay, wonderful. So it is not only for the documents, it is also for the product or any artifact in the project.
Yeah, for any product, we keep the versioning. Means whenever we deliver it for every iteration, means every phase, we can say, then we update the versioning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Your software and the documentation made for that software, the help files or whatever type of files you are creating, those have their own versions. Software has its
Yes.
own version, and everything else, which is changing, has its own version.
Yes.
Okay, then we,
Sir,
yeah, there is no,
I'm losing your voice.
okay, okay, let me start. Okay, 5.8.3, that is impact analysis. When a requirement change is proposed, it is necessary to complete an impact analysis to evaluate the proposed change in relation to how it will affect other requirements, the product, the project, and the program, whole of its environment. So as soon as the requirement change is proposed, you must check it for any impact creation. You must analyze it for any impact on anything on this requirement, related requirements, other requirements, the whole product, the whole project, or the program, whatever. Impact analysis is work performed to assess a proposed change, which includes identifying the risks associated to the change, the work required to incorporate the change, and the schedule and cost implications. A key benefit of completing the impact analysis is that it allows for changes within the project to be considered in an integrated fashion, thereby reducing project and product risk, which often arises from changes made without consideration to the effect on the program, project, and end product. Subsequent sections 5.8.3.1 and to 5, they describe a formal approach to impact analysis. Projects using an adaptive lifecycle may use an informal approach, but for traditional methods, this formal approach to assess impact and devise a course of action based on the value of the change along with its impacts. So this is a simple step, 5.8.3.1 to 5. Impact on the requirements baseline. First, this impact is seen. Then we check the impact on whether a proposed change conflicts with other requirements. Then we see impact on business analysis, impact on project management, and recommending a course of action. First of all, let's talk about the impact on requirements baseline. The business analyst reviews the change request to determine whether the request is a change to an existing requirement, it is a new requirement, or a set of requirements, or whether the change provides further detail of the same requirement. Using the traceability matrix, The business analyst identifies the requirements impacted by the change within the matrix. The business analyst can then quickly assess the affected relationships by impact, roughly quantifying how big or small and complex the change may be. Then is the impact on whether a proposed change conflicts with other requirements. A business analyst assesses the proposed change against the baseline requirements or requirements residing in the requirements backlog. The business analyst is looking for situations where requirements could be in conflict with one another. When implemented, a requirement that is in conflict with will cause another requirement to break or not to implementable. Conflicting requirements may break solution components that are already implemented. The business analyst analyzes the change request against the requirements baseline and existing solution components and notes areas of potential conflict. When requirement conflict arise, the business analyst facilitates a resolution to the conflict and may schedule a requirement session to discuss alternatives and reach consensus. It is very important to ensure that all impacted stakeholders are represented when sorting through the conflicts. A proposed change request that is identified as being in conflict with existing product features, when approved, will overturn or override existing approved functionality. The business analyst has an important role to preserve the integrity of the requirements baseline, solution component, and existing features already implemented to ensure a proposed change adds to value that the organization expects. Next is impact on the business analysis. When conducting impact analysis, the business analyst assesses the impact that the proposed change will have on business analysis work that is currently in process, including work that has been completed or approved. The business analyst also considers how far along the solution is in the development cycle and works with the project team members accountable for product development to obtain input regarding how the proposed change, if approved, impacts the work completed to date. The business analyst may need to replan current business analysis activities when the proposed change is deemed highly in priority than requirements that are currently in process. An adaptive project lifecycle is used for some projects, which is well suited for accommodating change. Aside from assessing the impacts to the current business analysis activities, the business analyst considers any updates that are required for existing business analysis documents, because these deliverables are often the input to the project team members who perform work after the business analysis. These documents need to be accurately reflect the requirements for the product and solution at all times in order for the development team to produce the correct end product. Interim documents or work products may need to be updated, but usually these are created for a one-time use. For example, a model that is built to elicit requirements from a specific stakeholder group. When the work products are not to be reused or referenced by project team, then the business analyst does not need to spend time reviewing and revising them. Process flows. Just a moment. Process flows, use cases, business requirement documents, software requirement specifications, and user stories are examples of documents that may need to be revised whenever a change is approved. When the business analyst is conducting impact analysis, the time needed for revising the required business analysis documentation should be estimated in the event that the proposed change is approved. Even the smallest change needs to be understood in terms of the impact to the project. That is the fourth point, impact on project management. Approved changes may impact one or more subsidiary plans within the project management plan, as well as in process work that the project manager has been monitoring and controlling. Maintenance of the project management subsidiary plans is outside the scope of the business analysis, and not all plans may be impacted. Impact on project management. The following list represents plans that a project manager may need to address whenever a change request is approved. So this includes a complete list of all the plans, that is a scope management plan, business analysis plan, schedule management plan, cost, quality, process improvement plan, HR, communication, procurement, risk, stakeholder management plan, scope baseline, schedule baseline, and cost baseline. In other words, all the ingredients of project management plan are impacted by changing requirements in scope in requirements. While adaptive projects tend to have fewer plans, they very often have a product roadmap, which shows at a high level what is planned for release over the course of the project iterations. Collaboration point here, the project manager and business analyst can work together to assess project impact. The time, scope, risk impacts are reflected in the impact analysis to properly scope the level of effort associated with the proposed change. The project manager assesses project impacts and the business analyst assesses impacts to the product. Product impacts may include changes to the business analysis deliverables required to build the end product, changes to scheduled business analysis activities, or changes to solution components in process are already implemented. To properly assess both project and product impacts of a proposed change, the project manager and business analyst should work together because each provide a perspective and level of knowledge that, when contributed jointly, will properly assess the size, cost, schedule, and risk impacts associated with the proposed change. After analyzing, this is the last point, recommending a course of action. After analyzing all the impacts of change and understanding the scope, risk, schedule, cost, implications, the business analyst assembles the results of the analysis. The business analyst recommends a course of action, the most suitable course of action, and includes this recommendation in the assessment. Some organizations look to the project team to provide more than one alternative, along with the pros and cons, assumptions, risks, etc. for each alternative. Each impact assessment may result in an abbreviated form of business case to speak to the value of the change. The purpose of recommendations and supporting analysis is to provide those responsible for approving the change with all the information required to make a sound decision. The process for approving changes was determined and approved upfront in business analysis planning. When the organization uses a change control board, the impact assessment is submitted for consideration. The business analyst adheres to the agreed change approval process for the project. Once a decision is reached, the business analyst proceeds to address the outcome. Then, recommending a course of action, the last point. The following course of action are possible after the proposed change is evaluated. Either the change is approved, it is deferred, rejected, or maybe it needs more information. If the change is approved, the business analyst completes the necessary update to the impacted business analysis deliverable. Planned and in-process business analysis activities are adjusted when impacted. If it is deferred, the business analyst documents the decision along with a rationale for the decision. When a proposed date or product release is decided upon, this information is noted and reflected in the appropriate plans to ensure the change is addressed at the requested future date. Rejected. Business analyst documents the decision and provides a rationale for the decision in the appropriate plan. Unlike the action for change deferred, there is no future action date reminders established in the plan because this work will not occur. It has been rejected. Then sometimes we need more information. Despite best efforts to ensure the impact analysis is thoroughly constructed, sometimes the change control board or approval team requests more information. Conditions in the business may have changed since the project was first approved, or the change control board may now be considering different solutions on working from new data that was unavailable previously. This in turn involves another round of elicitation and analysis, an update to the impact analysis, and a resubmittal to the authoritative body considering the change. Regardless of the decision made by the authorizing body, the business analyst has the responsibility of communicating the outcome of the change discussion with the project stakeholders. Interested stakeholders need to understand why a change was deferred or rejected and the rationale for the decision as much as they have a need to hear about the approved change request. Projects using an adaptive lifecycle often arrive at change decisions during incremental demonstrations of the working product. In iterative and adaptive projects, change is ongoing and emergent. Learning is often how the right product that maximizes value is identified. As in all projects, product owners in projects with an adaptive lifecycle still need to think about the impact of the change on the product and project to consider alternatives. Again, the degree of formality and the amount of documentation for the change decisions process depends upon the requirements of the organizational policies and processes or external regulations. Then is 5.8.4 controlling changes related to defects. Not all proposed changes are requests for new features or new requirements. Some changes are requests to fix defects that are identified in the solution. Such defects may be raised after formal or informal audits, inspections, or walkthroughs, or may surface when stakeholders interact with the solution. Because the defect is a deviation from a requirement, the business analyst stays involved in the defect repair process by monitoring the repair or the replacement of the non-conforming solution component. Although the requirements related documentation is not impacted, it is the component that is being modified to be aligned with the approved requirements. Defects in projects following an adaptive lifecycle may be identified during incremental demonstration of the working product, and defect management may be informal. For many more information on controlling changes related to defects, see section 6, that is the solution evaluation. So this brings us to the end of 5th chapter. So if there are any questions, please let me know. जी बुशरा